You will always be the problem until you do this one thing. It doesn't matter how many times you reinvent yourself, how many philosophies you adopt, how many gurus you follow, or how many spiritual practices you embrace. It doesn't matter how much you meditate, journal, or analyze your patterns. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who dared to declare the death of God and challenged every comfortable illusion humanity clings to, understood something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. He understood that there is one fundamental act of courage that separates those who remain trapped in cycles of self-created suffering from those who achieve what he called the ultimate liberation of the human spirit. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to create the same internal conflicts wherever they go? Different circumstances, same feelings of resentment and bitterness, different opportunities, same sense of being held back by forces beyond their control. Different relationships, same patterns of disappointment and feeling misunderstood. They move through life convinced that the world owes them something, that society is conspiring against their greatness, that if only external conditions would align with their vision, they would finally become who they're meant to be. But Nietzsche saw through this self-deception with brutal clarity. He understood that most human suffering comes not from external oppression, but from our refusal to face one terrifying truth about our own nature. A truth so threatening to our ego, so destructive to our victim narrative, so demanding of our authentic power, that we will construct elaborate philosophical systems, adopt complex spiritual practices, and create endless distractions, rather than confront this one reality that could transform everything. The genius of Nietzsche wasn't just his critique of traditional morality, it was his savage honesty about human psychology. He saw that people prefer noble suffering to ignoble responsibility, that they choose righteous resentment over uncomfortable growth, that they cling to beautiful victim stories rather than accepting the terrifying burden of becoming who they actually are. He understood that the same psychological cowardice that keeps individuals trapped in cycles of blame and bitterness is what creates entire cultures of weakness, mediocrity, and spiritual poverty. If you want to understand what this one thing is that Nietzsche identified as the key to breaking free from self-created suffering, and how this single act of courage can transform you from someone who blames the world for your problems to someone who creates their own destiny, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our insights on radical self-transformation and authentic power that can revolutionize your entire existence. Today I'm going to reveal the 4 stages of what Nietzsche called the path to self-overcoming, each building on the previous one, leading to the ultimate transformation that makes you stop being the problem in your own life. But I have to warn you, what I'm about to share will shatter your most cherished illusions, destroy your comfortable resentments, and force you to face a level of personal responsibility that most people find absolutely terrifying. The first stage is what Nietzsche called the death of inherited meaning. You remain the problem because you're still living according to values, beliefs, and purposes that were handed to you by others, rather than created by your own authentic experience. Most people spend their entire lives trying to fulfill someone else's definition of success, happiness, morality, and meaning, then wonder why they feel empty and resentful when they achieve these borrowed goals. Nietzsche wrote, "God is dead, and we have killed him," which wasn't a celebration, but a diagnosis. He saw that the traditional sources of meaning, morality, authority, and purpose that had guided human civilization for centuries were losing their power to provide genuine direction. But instead of recognizing this as an opportunity for creative freedom, most people panic and cling even harder to inherited beliefs that no longer serve them. Think about how many of your deepest values came from your family, your culture, your education, your religion, rather than from your own authentic engagement with life. How many of your goals are actually someone else's dreams that you internalized? How many of your fears are inherited anxieties rather than responses to real present moment threats? How many of your should and shouldn'ts came from external authorities rather than your own moral reasoning? This dependence on inherited meaning keeps you trapped because you're constantly trying to fit your authentic nature into frameworks that were designed for someone else's life, someone else's temperament, someone else's circumstances. You feel like a failure when you can't make these borrowed values work for you. But the problem isn't your inadequacy. It's the mismatch between who you actually are and who you've been told you should be. The death of inherited meaning feels terrifying because it means stepping into what Nietzsche called the void, the space where all external authorities have been questioned and found wanting, where all inherited purposes have been examined and rejected, where you stand alone with the terrifying freedom to create meaning from scratch. Most people would rather suffer in familiar cages than face this unlimited freedom. But Nietzsche understood that this void isn't empty. It's pregnant with possibility. It's the space where authentic selfhood can finally emerge, where your real values can be discovered, where your genuine purpose can be created. The death of inherited meaning isn't the end of meaning. It's the beginning of authentic meaning that comes from your own encounter with existence, rather than someone else's interpretation of what existence should mean. This stage requires the courage to disappoint others, to let down their expectations, to refuse their definitions of who you should be. It means accepting that your authentic path might be completely different from what your family wanted, what your culture values, what your education prepared you for. It means choosing the uncertainty of authentic selfhood over the security of conformity. The second stage is the recognition of resentment as your primary obstacle to power. Nietzsche identified resentment as the poisonous emotion that keeps people trapped in weakness, the bitter resentment that comes from feeling powerless while blaming others for that powerlessness. This isn't ordinary anger or disappointment. It's a deep psychological pattern where you derive your sense of identity and meaning from being wronged by others. Resentment is different from healthy anger because it doesn't seek resolution or change. It seeks to maintain the dynamic of being victimized. The person trapped in resentment doesn't actually want to solve their problems because solving them would require giving up the identity of being the person who has those problems. They become addicted to righteous indignation, moral superiority, and the comfortable position of being the good person surrounded by bad people. Nietzsche saw that resentment creates a slave mentality where you define yourself in opposition to others rather than in affirmation of your own nature. You become someone who gets energy from what you're against rather than what you're for, someone who feels powerful only when others are wrong, someone who needs enemies to maintain their sense of righteousness. This pattern is insidious because it disguises weakness as virtue. The person says they care about justice, truth, fairness, but what they really care about is maintaining their position as the enlightened victim, the conscious sufferer, the person who sees through everyone else's illusions while remaining blind to their own investment in powerlessness. Breaking free from resentment requires recognizing that your resentment toward others is actually resentment toward your own refusal to claim your power. When you blame others for holding you back, you're avoiding the terrifying recognition that you're the one who's been holding yourself back. When you focus on their wrongness, you avoid facing your own responsibility for creating change. Nietzsche understood that overcoming resentment doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting injustice. It means shifting from reactive opposition to creative action. Instead of defining yourself against what you hate, you start creating what you love. Instead of getting energy from fighting enemies, you get energy from building something meaningful. Instead of seeking to prove others wrong, you focus on proving yourself right through authentic action. This transformation is difficult because it requires giving up the psychological payoffs of victim identity, the sympathy you get from others, the sense of moral superiority, the excuse for not taking risks, the comfortable position of having someone to blame when things don't work out. But these payoffs come at the cost of your actual power, your authentic strength, your capacity to create rather than just complain. Leave in the comments. Can you identify areas where you might be more invested in being right about how others are wrong than in developing your own creative power? The third stage is what Nietzsche called amor fati, the love of fate, which means embracing everything that has happened to you as necessary for becoming who you are. This isn't passive acceptance or resignation. It's the active transformation of everything that has hurt, limited, or challenged you into fuel for your own growth and strength. Most people relate to their difficult experiences as obstacles to their happiness, evidence of life's unfairness, or proof that they're victims of circumstances beyond their control. They spend enormous energy wishing their past had been different, resenting the people who hurt them, or trying to escape the consequences of their previous choices. This resistance to what has already happened keeps them trapped in a relationship with life based on complaint rather than creation. Nietzsche saw that this resistance to your own history is what keeps you weak because it means you're constantly fighting reality instead of using reality as raw material for your transformation. When you reject parts of your experience as mistakes, traumas, or injustices that shouldn't have happened, you reject parts of yourself because you are the sum total of everything you've experienced and how you've responded to it. Amor fati means saying yes to your entire life, including the parts that hurt, the parts that seemed unfair, the parts that didn't match your preferences. It means recognizing that your struggles developed your strength, your pain deepened your compassion, your failures taught you resilience, your losses showed you what really matters. It means seeing that everything that happened to you was necessary for creating the unique combination of qualities, insights, and capabilities that make you who you are. This doesn't mean becoming grateful for abuse or pretending that injustices were good. It means recognizing that your response to difficult experiences is where your power lies, and that the person you've become through facing challenges is someone who couldn't have existed without those challenges. It means loving the totality of your fate, because that totality created the totality of who you are. The practice of amor fati transforms your relationship with suffering from resistance to integration. Instead of seeing pain as something that interrupts your life, you see it as something that deepens your life. Instead of viewing setbacks as evidence that you're unlucky, you see them as opportunities to develop qualities you couldn't have developed any other way. Instead of resenting the people who hurt you, you recognize that they helped forge your character in ways that purely positive experiences never could. This stage requires the ultimate psychological maturity, the ability to find meaning and value in experiences that feel meaningless and destructive while you're going through them. It means trusting that your life has an underlying coherence and purpose that becomes visible only when you stop fighting what has happened and start mining it for the gold of wisdom, strength, and authentic character that can only be extracted through difficulties. And here's the final stage that will transform you completely. What Nietzsche called the will to power as self-creation. The ultimate recognition that you are not a fixed entity trying to find your place in the world, but a creative force capable of continuously transforming yourself according to your own vision of what you could become. This is the one thing you must do to stop being the problem. Recognize that you are not a victim of your circumstances, your history, your conditioning, or your limitations, but the active creator of your own character, values, meaning, and destiny. The will to power isn't the desire to dominate others. It's the drive to master yourself, to become who you choose to become rather than who you happen to become. through unconscious reactions to your experiences. Most people live as if they're finished products trying to find the right circumstances to validate their worth, rather than recognizing themselves as ongoing creative projects with unlimited potential for transformation. They say things like, "This is just who I am," or "I can't help it. This is my personality," or "I'm not the type of person who does that," treating their current limitations as permanent features rather than temporary constraints that can be transcended through conscious effort. Nietzsche understood that this identification with your current limitations is what keeps you trapped in patterns of self-created suffering. When you believe you are your fears, your weaknesses, your bad habits, your emotional reactions, you remain imprisoned by them. But when you recognize that you are the creative force that can reshape all of these things, you become free to design yourself according to your own vision, rather than remaining stuck with the design that circumstances happen to create. This self-creation isn't about pretending to be someone you're not. It's about becoming more of who you actually are by removing everything that isn't essential to your authentic nature. It's about sculpting away the parts of your personality that were formed by fear, limitation, resentment, or conformity, and revealing the core strength, creativity, and authenticity that was always there but got buried under layers of conditioning. The practice of self-creation means taking full responsibility, not just for your actions, but for your character. It means recognizing that every day you have the opportunity to strengthen qualities you value and weaken qualities you want to transcend. It means understanding that you become what you repeatedly practice, so your daily choices are literally creating the person you're becoming. This is terrifying because it means you can no longer blame your past, your genetics, your upbringing, or your circumstances for who you are. If you're capable of self-creation, then you're responsible for continuing to create yourself in directions that serve your highest potential. You can't remain stuck in patterns that don't serve you while claiming you have no choice about who you are. Nietzsche spent his life demonstrating this kind of radical self-creation, often at great personal cost. He transformed himself from a sick, pessimistic young man into one of history's most powerful and influential thinkers through sheer force of will and commitment to his own development. He proved that limitations are often self-imposed, that transformation is always possible, that you can become who you choose to become, regardless of where you started. The will to power as self-creation is the ultimate antidote to being the problem in your own life, because it transforms you from someone who happens to life into someone who creates life. You stop being a victim of circumstances and become the architect of your own experience. You stop waiting for external conditions to change and start changing yourself in ways that naturally attract different conditions. So stop being the problem by embracing these 4 stages of transformation. Let inherited meanings die so authentic meaning can be born. Recognize resentment as your enemy and creative action as your ally. Love your fate so completely that you can use everything that has happened as fuel for growth. Claim your power as self-creator and take full responsibility for who you're becoming. This isn't easy work, but it's the only work that actually works. When you stop being the problem by becoming the solution through conscious self-creation, you transform from someone who resents existence to someone who celebrates it through authentic living. If this video helped you recognize your own capacity for radical self-transformation, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this truth, and subscribe for more insights on philosophical transformation and authentic power. And tell me in the comments, which of these 4 stages feels most challenging for you right now? I'm curious to hear about your journey towards self-overcoming, because until you embrace the will to power as self-creation, you will always be the problem. But once you become who you choose to become, you become the solution to everything that has been holding you back.